What would you do if you discovered that your own car had a secret weapon hidden and that you didn't even know? Ferrari engineers have just detected in Hungary a modification in the SF25 that could change everything. What exactly found Hamilton's car, and why can this rewrite the story of this season? After the official sessions, Ferrari engineers began reviewing the telemetry data of their two pilots, Leclerc and Hamilton. Something did not square. In almost identical conditions, Hamilton's car showed upper aerodynamic efficiency, a better traction at the exit of slow curves, and rear stability that did not correspond to the original simulations. It was not simply that Lewis was driving better. There was something else, something structural, hidden in the mechanics of SF25. Then came the turning point. When reviewing setup reports, comparisons in CAD and dynamic track simulations, an engineer detected a minimum difference in the structural data of the chassis mounted on the Hamilton car. The difference was so subtle that it could have gone unnoticed in any other team. But Ferrari, obsessed with finding answers, went further. What they discovered left ice cream even to the most veterans. The upper point of the anchoring of the rear suspension triangle in the Hamilton car had been relocated 30 millimeters down inside the gearbox housing. In the eyes of an amateur, this is invisible. But in Formula 1, 30 millimeters are an eternity. An alteration of this type not only modifies the geometry of the suspension, but completely transforms how the car interacts with the asphalt. Ferrari, without knowing it fully, had developed and installed a critical innovation that had not been implemented in both cars equally. And the most shocking, that modification had not been validated in a Grand Prix, but in a private filming session in Mugello, camouflaged as part of a promotional day. It was a play worthy of industrial espionage, executed in its own backyard, without the press or the rivals suspecting absolutely nothing. That session in Mugello was, in fact, a covert test. Under the pretext of recording media material, Hamilton's SF25 was subjected to a clandestine test that tested one of the most daring innovations of the last 5 years in the category. Reconfiguration not only altered the behavior of the rear suspension, but indirectly solved a chronic problem of the SF25. Its need to roll higher to protect the flat background. That precaution, which until then cost vital tenths, disappeared with this new configuration. When the engineers saw the results, they understood that they were not simply facing a good idea. They were facing a secret weapon that, if applied correctly, could redefine their season. It was a moment of technical epiphany, of those that rarely occur in full campaign. There was no going back. The team understood that this discovery should not remain in a workshop note or in a secondary improvement. It was a revolution hidden in full view, and its potential had not yet been completely explored. The technical key is in a concept called anti-quat. This property of the suspension system determines to what extent the rear of the car resists the sinking when the pilot steps on the accelerator thoroughly. In simple terms, by violently accelerating, the weight of the car tends to move backwards, pushing the rear axle to the ground. If this movement is not controlled with surgical precision, the car loses traction, degrades the tires more quickly, and what is even worse, it compromises stability in the initial curve output phases. What Ferrari has done is not just modifying a piece or changing an angle. It is redesigned from within the dynamic behavior of its car. When lowering the anchor point, the force's vector acts in that suspension arm is altered. This changes the way in which the force of the engine is transmitted to the asphalt. The SF25, which previously required more conservative configurations such as a major body height to prevent the bottom from hitting the ground, can now run significantly lower without compromising its structural integrity. And why does it matter so much to roll closer to the ground? Because modern aerodynamics of Formula 1, based largely on the soil effect, depends on a critical relationship between chassis and asphalt. The lower the car can roll without touching the ground, the greater the efficiency of the airflow under the flat bottom, which generates a vertical load, downforce, the more stable, more powerful, and less dependent on rear wings. In other words, the car sticks to the asphalt with more force, without paying the price of a higher drag or progress resistance. This translates directly in time by return. In circuits such as Hungaroring, where the passage through medium and fast curve dominates, each tenth won by additional aerodynamic load is crucial. And here lies the true importance of change. Ferrari has released between 2 and 3 tenths by return simply by a structural redesign that affects both mechanical and aerodynamic. Without touching the engine, without changing the front wing, without altering the software. Only pure geometry applied with millimeter precision. But the impact is not limited to time per return. It also changes the way the car manages lateral load peaks. The new rear suspension stabilizes the car in critical phases, such as the change of direction in linked or braking curves and support. This reduces the rear tire fatigue and maintains a more stable temperature window during the stint. All this, in turn, allows engineers to expand the operating range of the SF25, giving the team more strategic options in the race. In addition, this modification allows something that very few teams achieve early in the season: predictability. The car responds better to the pilot's orders. There are no surprises in the transition between loading and unloading, nor in the lateral mass transfer. Hamilton noticed it instantly. Therefore, despite the problems of initial adaptation in Australia, in Hungary his confidence in the car was visible from the first training. The car ceased to be an unpredictable animal to become a more refined extension of its body. Development does not end here. This modification opens new doors for Ferrari. They can now redesign active suspension maps, calibrate electronic damping with more aggressiveness, and adjust the tilt of the front car back with margins that were previously fully blocked by structural insecurity. What began as a solution to the problem of wear of the flat background has become an integral weapon that improves traction, aerodynamic efficiency, the useful life of the tire, the stability of the car, and therefore the general performance. That is why we already talk about this finding as a technical miracle. Because without great displays, without presenting a radically new car, Ferrari has made a leap of concept that could reconfigure the competitive order of the championship. In a sport where every millimeter matters, they have found the millimeter that transforms everything. The most disturbing of this innovation is not only its impact on track, but the domino effect that has begun to unleash inside and outside the paddock. Ferrari has not only found a technical solution, he has uncovered a sleeping potential that was hidden in full view in his own car. What was at first an isolated improvement, applied experimentally in Hamilton's car, quickly became a first-class strategic issue. Because once its impact on performance was proven, the inevitable question arose: why hadn't it been implemented before? And the most critical, why only one of the two cars had it installed? Once the other teams took note of the change, a chain reaction began. Mercedes, who had shown recovery signs, internally requested a complete review of its rear architecture. Red Bull, even with the advantage of RB21 on fast tracks, recognized its vulnerability in technical circuits such as Hungary. Even McLaren, the team with the greatest consistency in what goes from the championship, put its simulation models under review to verify if its suspension scheme had space for a similar modification without compromising the general balance of MCL 39. This situation has generated a new type of career, not on the asphalt but in simulation banks and wind tunnels and private design meetings. Formula One has entered a new phase of technical war, in which the teams no longer only care about the rhythm for return or reliability, but by who detects and applies first a solution that reconfigures the complete performance of the car. In an environment as millimeter as this, a geometric improvement, if not replicated or contained in time, can mean the beginning of the end for the hopes of championship of more than one team. In addition, this innovation forces FIA to be attentive. Not because there are illegalities, the modification meets the technical regulations, but because it opens a gray area within the regulation, filming sessions as a covert test field. It is already discussed between racks if these types of essays must have more strict limits or be directly supervised. The FIA, traditionally cautious, faces the dilemma of intervening in something that, although legal, can distort the spirit of technical equality between the teams. Internal level, the discovery has also repositioned Hamilton as a central figure within the Ferrari team. Not only for its results, but for having been the axis around which this technical transformation turned. The symbiosis between its piloting style and the new suspension has been so effective that some in Maranello already consider it the catalyst of the new technical project. While Leclerc looks for answers, Hamilton already has a car that responds to his hands like no other since golden days with Mercedes. And so, what began as a data anomaly after a qualifying session in Hungary has ended up unleashing a Cold War in Formula One 2025. Ferrari, for the first time in many years, has ceased to be the persecutor to become the team that imposes the technical narrative. The question is now simple and brutal. Can they hold the advantage before their rivals respond? In a sport where every thousandth of a second can define the success or failure of a whole season, Ferrari has taken a blow of silent but devastating authority. The modification in the rear suspension of the SF25 is not simply one more improvement in the long path of technical development. It is the kind of finding that redefines what was believed possible within the framework of rigid and highly restrictive regulations. It is, in essence, the proof that there are still margins for technical genius, even in an era as controlled as the current one. Leave your analysis in the comments. What do you think about the use of filming sessions such as undercover test fields? Should the FIA intervene, or is it a legitimate part of the strategic game? Share your perspective, because every opinion adds, and this channel seeks to build a technical debate.